our speakers back, so thank you very much for that. Yesterday, Nathan mentioned the wonderful reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete rack. Something I too have first-hand experience of at my place of work, where a good proportion of our building is now currently inaccessible. We've joined on stage today by Barry Moss, who's kindly joined us, and I'd like to kick off first, please, with Barry, if you can tell us a little bit of where we are at the moment with RAC. Thank you, Barry.
Almost good afternoon, I think. I've spoken briefly asking a question yesterday, but my name's Barry Moss. I'm the co-chair of the Seabraham PWG, and also, for plainly what are many sins, I'm a emergency preparedness manager in an acute trust that has a terminal RAC problem. So this came to light for me in 2019. I was called into a meeting with our head of governance and risk, and I was informed that the SCOS alert had come out about RAC. And I'm assuming when I talk about SCOS alerts and RAC, people do know what this is about. It's plainly been all over the media with schools. So I'm not going to go into that much detail. And I was called into a meeting, and the head of governance for the NHS Trust, a hospital, community services, said, we've got this RAC problem. Brilliant. I said, fantastic. I said, where is it? He said, everywhere. Okay, what do you mean everywhere? He said, everywhere in the hospital buildings. 5,000 roof planks and 10,000 wall panels. The entire building is made out of this stuff. This is 2019, by the way. He then asked me, could I do a risk assessment? And I said, what, on the entire building? He said, no, on each panel. Yeah, exactly. That was my response. Tried to keep a straight face and said, not a chance. And then my journey for RAC started. So that's nearly 4 years now. Been involved in the whole process, probably the leading trust in the NHS trust in the country dealing with RAC. We've been through it all, we've seen it all. We're almost at the end of our journey in terms of lots of pieces of wood holding the roof up and the walls being sorted out. I'll tell you all about it if you're really interested. So really, RAC for me is when the schools thing broke earlier this year. You know that sensation you get when somebody tells you about something, then they're really earnest about this really important thing that's really going on now. And you're like, yeah, been doing that, mate, for 4 years. Yeah. And that's how sinking feeling felt for me when the rest of it came out. So you want to talk about RAC? Help yourself. But I will tell you one thing, if nobody asks me a question, it's all about your risk assessment. I'll leave it at that.
I'll also just add from RAC, I also have a RAC trust. And from the talk that we've just done, think about the impact from the Department of Education's decision to close schools. Think about that immediate impact of schools, of the fact that you've got teachers that have been teaching in that building. And if you have a building that's got some concrete built from the 1950s to about 1995, just check your concrete. We've found it everywhere. I have a site that's 65% RAC. But we found it within one of my counties, in a police station, in theatres, in schools, in council buildings. I'm about to go to the building that thankfully has now lost 2 floors. Thank you, Worcestershire. Yeah, if you've got questions on RAC, please ask. But equally, it's concrete. Just don't stand under it when it falls.
Thank you, Nathan. Right, I'm looking to the floor now. So can we ask for questions, please? Who'd like to lead? Got any first questions that are coming up at the moment? In which case, can I ask Emma, please, to have a... Oh, sorry, Emma's just... Oh, we got a question over there. Apologies. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, I'm Fiona Galbraith. I'm actually here on behalf of Buckinghamshire University, but I want to bring a point to Shelley and Paul from a slightly different part of my life. Thank you very much for the presentation about flood management and the community-based resilience around that. I've been working with a similar project in Gloucestershire, and I just wanted to bring people's awareness to a website, integratedlocaldelivery.com, which provides a lot of resources around a very similar theme, including some training opportunities for rural facilitators and how to use the integrated local delivery framework to deliver community-based response to emergencies such as flooding. including long-term resilience, and moreover, how to get national and indeed international funding down to community level through the personal relationships that are built up by a facilitator. So I don't know if you're aware of that, but I just thought it was a useful adjunct to what you said. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got any other questions? If you have got questions, yeah, put your hand up nice and tall for me, please. Thank you very much. We go over here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Message from Nathan and maybe Joe. One of my other hats is that I volunteer for a charity for neurodiverse people. And over the last few years, there's been a greater understanding and awareness of the needs and different types of neurodiversity. But when I was listening to you talking, it just, hammered home that, an emergency impacts members of the public, but the impacts on neurodiverse people are often difficult to measure. I just wondered whether you had any thoughts on any best practice that's been done or any recent thinking that's been done in this field.
Good question. I think the answer at the moment is no. But that's something that, again, we need to work on. We need to think about engaging with charities that work with neurodivergent people to understand, actually, what are the needs? What are the specific considerations we have? Because you're right, having worked at incidents where individuals that were autistic have been impacted, the impact on them is very different to others because the way they perceive the world is very different. So having an understanding that someone that you may think is kicking off, actually no, it's their coping mechanism. That's how they're trying to understand what's happening. So I actually think it's something that's an area that we need to do more work on as a profession and as a field. We need to work a lot better on specific areas that we potentially haven't considered before. And Joe, was there anything you wanted to add from the VCS EP on this?
I think what I would point to is maybe that there is a little bit of work already being done, particularly by some of the larger national organisations who maybe have some of the capacity to do this, but also local organisations as well. So I think there's an awful lot that's been done at a local and national level within the third sector to address this within their own organisations. But one thing I think that they have sometimes struggled to do is to then apply that own, how they look after their own staff and volunteers and how they recognise the different aspects and perspectives of supporting people to achieve and using the strengths of neurodiverse, that community, and then applying that within their own practice. And I think it's bizarre to see sometimes, but I've worked with colleagues from Red Cross and other organisations before, and they do brilliant work for their own staff and volunteers. And when they go to support people in the community, they kind of forget that. And I think there is a little bit of work to do to extend the work that they do within their own organisations out into the practice with other partners, and to see some of that just being shared a little bit more. So I think it does exist. It does exist, but I think there is, as Nathan said, a little bit more we need to do to kind of get that out into practice and actually within communities. And again, it's not just it's not the needs purely of those communities and people with neurodiversity, but the strengths as well. Like how do we use how do volunteers from those communities support others in their community who live with those particular particular conditions? So I think it's about the strengths and the needs of those communities, and I think we need to draw on that a lot more.
Thank you. Can I come to Emma, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a comment on that.
Emma, sorry, just really quickly. I just wanted to jump in really quickly on that last one. Sorry, and just say that thinking about the research that was done in preparation for that training, and the hundreds of articles that were looked at. So there was ones with looking at social workers working with learning disabilities, domestic violence, people who'd experienced child protection issues. And I really don't recall any of those research studies focusing specifically on neurodiverse populations. And I think that might be something just to kind of that shows. I know you mentioned yourself that people are becoming more and more aware. So hopefully maybe that gap will be met. But just from a research perspective, I think that probably is a massive gap as well. So it's not just from a practice perspective. So that's maybe something else that needs to be looked at. And as a starting point is kind of talking to people who'd had that experience from that particular angle.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry about that. Emma.
Yeah, it was a few years ago, so forgive me, I can't remember which one of the London universities it was. But I'll take an action from today because I know there was some work around emergencies and autistic people, and there was products that came out of that. So I'm going to take that back and have a bit of a research and find it and see if it's still current and share it if it is.
And Emma, did you have a couple of questions yourself as well?
Yeah, so my comment is to Joe. First of all, some observations around your work with social workers and disasters. I have actually looked at the modules myself. So I've done training myself. I've been on training around social work and disasters. So I was really interested to see what this Open University modules were like, and the fact it was online, because a lot of training is often in a room, you know, with groups, and I wondered how it would work. And actually, it's really refreshing. I've actually done some of the modules and working my way through it. What was really nice was the link between social care and climate change, which that was a little shock at the beginning. I didn't expect that. And I think yesterday we heard that we're creating more risks than we're actually preventing. So I think it's really timely to have that in the training. I know it's having a big impact on children. It's their future, isn't it? So that was one of the observations I really liked. The other was how easy it is to dip in and out. So it is very flexible. We're looking at it in our own local authority, and then maybe thinking about, we do 2 days a year sort of corporate volunteering opportunities for our staff, and we're looking at maybe offering those 2 days for the social workers to do that training. So it's just thinking around. I know you talked about resources are scarce and limited. And the final comment I was going to make, again, being in this field of work for so long, and having done some work in the past with the Social Care Institute of Excellence, and we've always said, you know, social care is well placed around the human aspects of emergencies, but we've never really offered them anything that validates or formalises that role in terms of preparedness. So I think it's a really pivotal moment that you've created this. I think it's absolutely amazing that you've offered not only the training to social workers, but they've made it free for everyone. And having looked at it myself, there is some that's specifically related to social workers, especially around sort of social injustice and using the legislation and social work models. But there's also a lot that's in there that's very transferable to the voluntary sector, but anyone really who's got that sort of frontline response, working with people who are going to be going through that type of experience. And I'm sort of picking out bits, really useful video clips. They've got a really nice workbook that's got some nice questions where you could have some discussions. So you could actually go into there and pick little bits of the training for other purposes as well, which is brilliant. So my question to Joe after that is, how are you going to keep it live in terms of updating it and getting the feedback?
Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for those great endorsements. That's good. You probably should have done the talk instead of me about them with all that. But that's a major challenge, especially just from, we had this period of time and funding, and even just, anybody here who works in a university or works with universities, that often it's the researcher's time is the resource that's given, and now that's kind of come to an end. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work, but because we've had endorsements from the Department for Health and Social Care and Department of Education and the British Association of Social Work and a lot of other groups, this is kind of the culmination of creating that training, and those are the questions kind of that are the next step, is how do we maintain it, how do we keep it up to date, because it's already a bit behind because it was made it was made over the course of a year or so, and probably about a year ago. So yeah, keeping that up to date is really, but a lot of it we do hope will be evergreen, and it might just be a case of supplementing it. And it is something that we've talked about as well, is having that training there those 2 days, but then when there's a specific type of disaster, maybe having some supplemental training specifically focused on that. And we were talking during the break about how social workers often don't respond the day of a disaster, the week of a disaster, maybe not even the month of a disaster. It's that more long-term kind of work. And so there's opportunities to implement that training and plan that training a little bit. It's not necessarily as urgent as some social workers might be there, but there's also opportunities to support the social workers who are already responding to that disaster as well. And I think that criticality, and that what you mentioned about climate change, but that's one thing that we really wanted to inject into the training, was around that criticality of making sure that there's this decolonizing disaster social work and that kind of perspective of not going into a place, not going into a population and saying, we know best, we're going to tell you what to do, this is what your recovery is going to look like, but actually working with those communities and saying, what do you want your recovery to look like? Because like you said, and I'm sorry I missed yesterday, but it sounds like it was raised, is that you can go in and make things worse, and that's far too often the experience from a kind of top-down approach. So it is that kind of injecting that criticality, and that should be evergreen. But yeah, the currency, maintaining it, how we kind of register social workers who have gone through it, those are all challenges that I do not have answers for. But we've got so many organizations involved, if we can't come up with answers to them, then those answers may not be able to be found. But thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask a sneaky question myself, if I may, and this I'm going to direct to John. And this is with reference to county voluntary emergency committees. Now, I mentioned earlier that, obviously we had our county voluntary emergency committee that recently responded to Storm Babes. We actually have the VCSEP, who are members of our CVEC, and actually Helen Gray will be becoming the chair of CVEC in January. So you obviously share that platform already, and we're doing a huge amount of work to try and incorporate and integrate all voluntary organisations who have that role in responding to emergencies. I just wondered if you have the similar take-up across the country with other county voluntary emergency groups.
Great question. Not as high an uptake as we would like to see. One of the things I kind of challenge our own emergencies partnership team. We're not a big team, 14 of us. 3 of us are actually the engagement team. So myself and 2 of my colleagues are going to be the people that would join voluntary community sector groups like that. We're not going to be able to cover 38 LRFs. But my message and challenge to our team has been, you don't need to be in each of those 38 LRFs, because you have partners like British Red Cross, St John Ambulance, local infrastructure organisations, victim support, others from the community and voluntary sector that are better placed than I will ever be to join a local resilience forum. I think the thing that we have struggled with and are challenging our partners from the voluntary and community sector to do more of is where that representative is there, the best will in the world to try and do their best to represent the entire third sector in a locality, is to go there with some insight from partners beyond their own organisation, and to be able also to be a conduit for information to be shared back out. We are in no way kind of pining for the voluntary and community sector across all different organisations to all be sat around the LRF table, the top table or the subgroup. That's not going to happen. But through 2 or 3 quick and swift degrees of separation, we would hope and expect there are mechanisms in place in each of the local authority areas that enables the voluntary and community sector to influence and be influenced by the work of you as practitioners and the other partners that make up those forums. So I think across the board we've talked about there being one particular feature of an LRF that we see as being an indicator of success almost. And do those voluntary and community sector subgroups exist? The vast majority of LRFs do have them in some form or another, which is we think shows great intent for the voluntary sector to be considered with due regard in the work of LRFs, which is great. But I think that the key for us is that mechanism out to engage the wider sector, to draw in and to draw on their strengths and needs, and to better understand those. So that's, I think, probably the key message I would want local resilience forums to go away with is, what does that mechanism look like, and how do you help to support it to be as swift and efficient as possible?
Thank you. And I think I'm going to add something onto that as well for us to take away, is if you know within your areas, how your community sector actually link into your TCGs, peacetime TCGs, tactical advisory groups and things like that. We're very fortunate in Worcestershire that actually we do embrace that, and actually across the whole of the West Mercia partnership, because we are Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, Herefordshire and also Worcestershire councils, and they do have a voice at that table, and it's a really important voice from the planning side, from the response and recovery as well. So thank you very much. So do take that away and consider what goes on in your area as well. Thank you.
I'd also just like to add really quickly on that element, and certainly the LRFs that don't have a voluntary sector group, that an exciting part of Paul's work around the stronger LRF programme is around the resilience standards. And voluntary engagement is a resilience standard. So I think for those LRFs that don't have a group, there are now going to be questions to be asked about why not? Where is your voluntary engagement? And making sure that voluntary engagement is at response and preparedness and recovery. Because certainly within my 3 LRFs, 2 have got strong voluntary sector panels. 1 doesn't, but does use the voluntary sector in response. And it's like, well, you use them in response, but you don't bring them into the planning, and you don't bring them into recovery. So I think a key bit going forward, and a really exciting part of Paul's work within DLUC, is to actually use those national resilience standards to benchmark against, but also to be able to hold LRFs and partners to account of, why don't you have this? It works elsewhere. Why haven't you considered it? And to justify their decisions, and hopefully to change some minds alongside the new Chief Resilience Officers.
Thank you, Nathan. Just see if there's another question in the room. Thank you.
I got 2.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.
How does what you're talking about sit alongside the police family liaison officer role? And the other one is, how do you get at young families, bringing up the kids, having extensions built, without involving schools who have already got enough on their plates?
And is that question to anyone in particular, or just across the whole panel? Thank you. Yeah, Julie, thank you.
I've got a sort of half answer for the first question, in terms of in the, obviously from Wales, and in our Gwent LRF area. Many moons ago, one of the things I did when I was in the local authority was set up a crisis support worker scheme, following a lot of what Emma and other colleagues across the country had done, working with Rosie Murray, who was the original chair of HAG, who came and worked with us. Social care, social workers were requested, and our departments were requested to encourage social workers to volunteer as crisis support workers who would work alongside police family liaison officers to deliver the, we say the softer side, because obviously the police liaison officer has an investigative role to do. This scheme was started back in the late 1990s and is still current. In fact, we've got a conference next week. Oh, the week we got, yeah, I can see Nat nodding. And it's grown and grown. The only thing is, social care is under so much pressure. Sadly, the volunteers, the numbers aren't as great as they were. Those who are still training, and the police family liaison officers alongside of them, they are very strong. And they have had such incredible training. So we're hoping to extend that, and our colleagues in South Wales Police also want to do a similar scheme. The problem with it is that, you know, this is lovely if you happen to be living in that particular area or be affected by an incident in those areas. It's not consistent even across Wales. So what may be an offer and a provision in one area isn't necessarily the same across the UK, and not across Wales even. So we're looking at, particularly with the experiences of COVID, actually the very specific roles that crisis support workers are to provide alongside police family liaison officers. We may widen that role to encompass some other things that we've actually identified from the work of our social care teams throughout COVID. So we're looking at that at the moment as to what that might look like. And I share that via the Human Aspects Group, so that we can, you know, hopefully encourage other areas to do similar things. But certainly we work closely with the police and the family liaison officers in the south of Wales.
And I think we're sadly in the same position at the moment, where we're due to go to recruitment for crisis support teams, but part of our programme, and it's absolutely based on Masternet and the Lord Justice Clark report about that working with police family liaison officers and having that support directly from the beginning as well. So our training is, and we actually train by police family liaison officers and do that integration as part of our crisis support team. So we've got training across the piece. So yeah, we certainly include that as well. And there was a second question, and forgive me, could you remind me just what that second question was as well? Sorry about that.
Education in schools and children.
Schools and children?
Yeah, it's how you get at young families without asking the schools to help, because they've got enough on their plate, to get them engaged in all that we're talking about.
Again, many years ago when I was first in local authorities, we had a really good connection with our education department, and we speak to our head teachers, and emergency preparedness and responses and recovery is part of their initial induction if they are looking to apply for a head teacher role, so that at that level they go to be the head teacher and they're already aware that part of their portfolio includes EPRR. But I mean, the Dunblane tragedy, I think, without fail, shows people the need to be aware, to actually educate our children so that they know what to do without frightening them. I've got 3 grown children, and it's been in my and their lives throughout. In fact, sometimes they say, "Oh, stop talking about it, Mum. We know enough." I've got grandchildren now, and I'm doing exactly the same with them. In a way, and the flood group, and something that you said about how do we tell our children this without scaring them, making it, okay, so this is what we do. I don't know if you can take over that, because that was something that struck me from the presentation you gave to us.
As part of my work and the work the JBA do, we've been working with the Department for Education. There is schools, obviously, throughout the country that are in flood risk areas. And just to pick up a couple of things that have been created over the years, because I think sometimes we naturally go to reinvent the wheel when there are some cracking things out there that we've done in the past, and we simply forget by going on to the new bright and sparkly project. But as part of the EA PFR Pathfinders, there was 3 Pathfinders. There was one in Yorkshire, there was one in South West, and there was one in Oxcam. I already mentioned one of the outputs of Oxcam, which was the floodmobile. In the South West, though, Pathfinder, Devon and Cornwall Council, they created something called Mrs. Tale. And Mrs. Tale was an animation. It's by Aardman Animations, actually, that make the Wallace and Gromit series. And the Mrs. Tale is absolutely fabulous. It was designed to hit everybody, but it's great for kids. And there were other things that were created too on Pathfinder, and before that, on the Yorkshire Flood Resilience website, which is being hosted by York City Council. There's something called Flood Alert, and this was actually created as a game for children to play, and it was about them picking what can you do to help mum and dad if there's going to be a flood, essentially. And obviously mum and dad are putting barriers up and things like that, but they were collecting their toys, putting the Xbox in the bedroom, things like that. And then it was almost like water is coming here, shall we do some mopping? Obviously none of these situations are ideal because they're hazards, but it's introducing children to the concept that these are happening. And very quickly, I did an assessment on a school, certainly not in this area, it was across the country, and I was talking to one of the headmistresses there, and there was a particular child that, because of the flooding, the school is situated almost in a bowl, and the school's been flooded several times, and this child is really overly impacted. I don't mean that it has no right to be impacted, but it was more noticeable to the teachers. This child really worries about it. And then it had been brought up at home too, because obviously the school is flooded at some point, quick onset flooding, when the kids have been there in the past. And with these conversations, it was almost like, should we be encouraging schools to think about the natural hazards in this country? That is our national, it's one of our hazards. It's something we see on telly, we see. So are we doing enough at that grassroots level? So we've got, for JBA, you've got JBA Trust, and they've got things like the wave tank and the sand. I don't know if anybody's ever seen these, where you can create sort of different things with the sandbox to see how water flows. These sorts of tools, they're not cheap to create. There's even a PFR flood house. If anybody was there at Flood and Coast this year, they would have seen it there. That was created for the Yorkshire Pathfinder, which I project managed. And I can tell you now, these tools are not cheap. They should be doing the round around our schools. They can relate and align to national curriculum if we want it to. So if schools now are starting to be looked at for resilience adaptation, why not get the kids involved now? Because these are the future people that could be going to our industry, and you're starting off at just a younger age.
Thank you.
Can I just very quickly chip in there as well? There are opportunities, though, to engage with schools as well. And in Rochdale, we are doing quite a bit of work with the schools to get young people and teachers and the school entity as well engaged. But the curriculum can be so tight. And very often, teachers are very attracted, so I'm a geographer, teachers are very often attracted to overseas case studies, for example, which is brilliant. That's what we should be looking at. But they often overlook the hazards, as Shelley has alluded to, the hazards on the doorstep, the hazards in the region. Just a bit of I'm not involved in this at all, but the Northwest Flood Hub, which is affiliated to the WRFCC, they do have some resources on there, particularly for the geography curriculum, which has just been launched. So it's about trying to tie in resources to the curriculum. But like I say, the curriculum is tough. My other half is a geography teacher, so I get a bit of an insight into this. And I recently went to an event that shall be nameless in the Northwest. And there was a brilliant video, lasted for about 4 or 5 minutes, where young people talked about climate change and the impacts of climate change. And however, it was brilliant. It should be shown in schools right across Manchester and beyond. However, there was an error in what one of the kids said about climate change. They muddled up the ozone layer with climate change, and it wasn't quite right. And because of that, my other half says she would be unable to use that otherwise really good resource, because you put that in front of kids and it confuses them. So we have to, I'm going to sound a bit dull now, but there has to be rigour in the resources that are also produced for schools as well. It needs to be done co-produced with teachers to make sure that it is speaking to the curriculum, because teachers are very instrumental in that they will go to resources, but they'll review those resources, and if it doesn't say what they need it to say, they will not use it. They can't use it because they're driven by the curriculum and driven by results.
Thank you very much for that. That's finally all we have time from a question perspective now. I just wanted to say, the conference has provided that wonderful face-to-face opportunity once again for us to listen to and learn from the expertise, experience, and hear about all the exciting developments, programs and toolkits that we have available. And I think that's one of the most important impacts of conferences and seminars and workshops that we do hold face-to-face, and also the wonderful networking we have as well. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Emma, the chair of our office, Hagen CR, for her vision and leadership, and our wonderful speakers today. So can I please ask you to show your appreciation for our speakers? Thank you.